Hey everybody, welcome to the Brave in the Bay podcast by Indivisible Mid-Peninsula. I'm your host, Carla Personani. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Brave in the Bay podcast. I have a great guest today, Sean Werner from States Win, and he's going to tell us all about his organization and why it's really important that we all pay attention to it. Welcome to the podcast, Sean.
Thank you so much, Carla, and it's so great to be on.
Great to have you here. So
Of
tell us
course.
about your organization. What is States Win and why are you guys important?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Carla. States Win may be a new name for folks. We just recently went through a rebrand and we're now States Win. We were formerly known as Sister District, and it's so awesome to be at Brave on the Bay because this is our origin story. We were founded by five amazing, dynamic women from the Bay who woke up after Trump's first election and realized that sending another strongly worded email to their Democratic member of Congress probably wasn't going to meet the moment. And so they looked around and realized that Republicans for the longest time have been investing in states, and that the Democrats were tardy to the party, one of our founders originally states. And so they realized that states impact our day-to-day lives more than folks may even know. I mean, the folks that will who will write the laws that administer the 2028 election will be elected this fall in all of our states. And so they had the very wise concept of identifying volunteer teams in communities that are disproportionately blue and pairing them with key state legislative races so that we could build democratic power in our state legislatures to make an impact on voting rights, on LGBTQ rights, on abortion access, on education public policy. So many things are decided at the states, and we've been at it ever since. It'll be 10 years next year, and we have dozens of teams across the country, and we'll endorse more candidates than we ever have in this year because it's absolutely critical for us to continue to build opportunities in the states. And so we are very excited. I feel a real sense of urgency around the elections this fall. I know that the federal level, everyone can name who is their U.S. senator. A lot of folks can name who their member of Congress is. But when you get down to the state legislative level, that is the closest level to the voter, sometimes not as well known. We don't get as much press. And so having conversations like this and in our communities is just really helpful to get the word out about the importance of state legislatures and how someone in the Bay can impact an election that will be absolutely critical in this coming fall's election.
Yeah, that's so true. I've always been civically active just in the sense of voting, but never really paid much attention. And before all of this happened, I couldn't have told you who my state senators and state representatives were. I voted the best I could, but it's actually kind of hard to find out information about those people when you do vote. So I'm glad there's more attention being spent on the states and also the local elections. And I'm glad you guys are out there fighting the good fight.
Yeah, absolutely, Carla. And I think that the one thing that we cannot do is not create a big enough tent for people to engage. There are thousands, as we just saw last Saturday, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of folks that are willing to take action, that they want to stand up about against what's happening in Washington, and they know that they can come march. Now that we are a few days after, hopefully folks have rested, they're probably wondering, what can they do? But for a state legislative race, in comparison to the millions and millions of dollars that are thrown into U.S. Senate races or to congressional races, sometimes, a couple dozen thousands of dollars can make a huge impact. I think about our team at States Win CA Peninsula, who raised money this was the very first time that we had endorsed a candidate in the odd year that's actually running in the even year. And one of our alum sought to run for a Wisconsin Senate seat. And we were like, okay, if we were able to show her strength through 2025, maybe we'll be able to send a message to Republicans. And oh boy, did we ever. When the financial filing came out, she had a Democratic primary at the time, but the primary is in August. So the primary opponent decided that she wasn't going to run any longer. But then, more importantly, the Republican incumbent decided that he was not going to seek re-election. So now Jenna Jacobson is running in an open seat. I'm not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. They raised $16,000 for her in 2025 that had an outsized impact. Obviously, Robin Vining still needs to continue to do the work to get elected this fall, and it still will be a tough fight. Kamala barely won this district, but that is the type of research and support that we provide to these teams of volunteers. We help them articulate and understand why it's important to engage in this work. And so, Carla, you're a perfect example of a way of someone that we know wants to be civically engaged, someone that wants to make an impact. And with the costs and the sizes of our races, there's no better place to make an impact. I will also say I'm originally from Pennsylvania. And the Pennsylvania House right now has the first Black woman speaker in the Commonwealth's history. She got that gavel because we won a seat by 63 votes in
Wow.
2022. 63 votes gave Democrats the 102nd seat against the 101 that Republicans had, which has allowed us to, in that year, was the first Democratic majority in over decades, and we were able to stop a constitutional amendment that would have been sent to the people had we not flipped that chamber to ban abortion. This is the type of very strategic, streamlined and focused efforts in these key state legislative seats that really can make an outsized impact. And so I'm always very excited to talk to folks about it. Sometimes I may get a little wonky, so I apologize, Carla, but always happy to bring people along. And I think that the most important thing is that it really is just people helping people. When you're running for state legislative office, you're not doing it to get rich. You're not doing it for notoriety. You're doing it because you realize that you have a voice and the opportunity to do the work to fight for your community. And so I think about the OBGYNs that said enough of these abortion bans, enough of cuts on healthcare. I just closed a clinic, and so I'm going to run for office to go to my state capital to see if I can do something. I'm thinking about the teacher that constantly has to pinch pennies to buy, some Play-Doh or some school supplies for her classroom because these Republican-led legislatures are just deeply unfunding our public schools, which is the lifeblood for opportunity for so many kids. As a product of public schools, as a first-generation college kid, if I didn't have my civics teacher in high school, I may not have been here. And so that's the type of people that ultimately decide to run. And that's what Stateswin does. We have a whole team of colleagues that, help walk them through what that process is like, right? When you put your name on the ballot, it's the most courageous thing that I think that you can do, but it's going to be mystifying. What does it mean that I need to raise $250,000, $300,000? In so many communities, that's a lot of money. But in comparison to a US Senate race, that's not that much money. But also just thinking through, how do I make an ask? How do I run an effective campaign that's centered in my voice? And then we have people, volunteers that are just there to recognize that they can help this one person that is making tremendous sacrifice to improve their communities. And that's the beauty of Stateswin, is that it's people helping people to then ultimately help even more people by enacting progressive public policy that we know does benefit millions of Americans.
I love that you told us that story about the race that was won by 63 votes because from what I understand, there are so many races that are won by a small margin of votes. So, because a lot of people think my vote doesn't count. And, one of the things that I'm learning that I assumed before, but I'm really learning now through this process is that your vote absolutely counts. And sometimes the vote margin is razor thin and it could be a difference of a handful of votes, whether you get a government that you like or that you don't like.
Absolutely. In 2019 or in 2017, in Virginia, the deciding seat actually was a tie. It was the very first election that Sister District at that time, now Stateswin, engaged in. And Shelley Simons was an exact tie. They went and by a game of lots, which was pulling film canisters out of a bowl. They pulled it, and it was David Yancey. It wasn't Shelley Simons. So he won that seat, and Republicans continued to control. But also, I want to highlight that sometimes it isn't even just control that can be helpful. The efforts and the campaigns of that election cycle made Republicans wake up, and they were actually able to pass the Medicaid expansion in Virginia, even under a Republican leadership. Now, when we have gavels and we're able to completely control the legislative process, the outcome is guaranteed. In that situation, I think that they saw the writing on the wall, and they ultimately decided to go ahead and give hundreds of thousands of Virginians the health care that they deserved. But these races are often won by such razor thin margins. And, we have, my colleague likes to say that at Stateswin, we do three things and we do them really, really well. The first one is supporting these candidates. As I was saying, these candidates often don't have a ton of political experience. And so helping them navigate the system, helping them run the campaign, and sometimes just being a sounding board of their concerns and or sharing in their excitements. Supporting candidates is absolutely critical to helping them navigate an effective campaign. The second thing that we do, direct voter contact. So whether that is writing postcards, whether that is phone banking, some of our teams will also go canvas. That ability to grow the number of people that the campaign is talking to, that it's just invaluable, because when you identify someone that's undecided and you say, "Hey, voter, would it be okay if I shared this information with the campaign?" And then the campaign follows back behind and says, "Oh, I heard you were concerned about data centers. Let's talk about data centers." That is the type of responsive campaigns that are going to be the most effective to break through the noise, where it just feels like we're so divided that nobody actually is looking out for the regular voter. And then the final piece is raise money. In a race that's decided by a game of chance or in 63 votes, the ability to contribute or raise like the $17,000 that I talked about earlier in 2025. And we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Pinching in and realizing that your $500, $100 is going to go that much further. But when collectively combined with other volunteers and donors throughout the country, you can make an absolute huge impact. And so it's really awesome to be doing this work in this targeted way to see that outsized impact.
That's incredible. Now, what kind of candidates do you help? Are you just doing the state senate and state legislature, or are you also doing local elections?
Yeah, we only work in the state legislative space. And I say only, that is a lot of races throughout the country that we ultimately need to assess. And so how we get to the people that we ultimately endorse is a process of first identifying which states are in play. We have publicly stated that there are 9 core states that we will be working in. And then what is the path to power in those specific states? Sometimes, a lot of times, it's in both chambers. And sometimes it is maybe just in one. But we try to do 3 things. We want to hold the democratic power that we have. So in Pennsylvania, holding that narrow majority is absolutely critical. I also highlight there's a special election on May 5th with Shedrick Green, who we've endorsed, who is running in a special election, as I said, in the Michigan Senate. This will determine whether or not Democrats maintain control of the Michigan Senate. And so identifying places where we have to hold power, and then places that I call our flip opportunities. And so, for example, Wisconsin is one of my places where I'm the most excited about for 2026. If we pick up just 2 seats in the Senate, 5 seats in the Assembly, we could create a blue trifecta, which is just absolutely remarkable because it unlocks the tremendous progress that we can make in a state like Wisconsin, who has historically been the most gerrymandered state in America. And then a place that we call blue inroads. Those inroads look like the work that we did in 2025 in 2 special elections. So, for example, Caitlin Dray, absolutely amazing candidate. We supported her in her special election, in a district that Trump won by double digits. She turned around and won by 9. And that victory
Wow.
last year broke the Republican supermajority. And so making those inroads where we can claw back some power. But also Mississippi. We endorsed two candidates in the Mississippi Senate, winning both of those, which broke the Republican supermajority in Mississippi. So we're constantly looking for opportunity. The 9 states that we have now is going to be a lot of work, but also trying to identify some of the unexpected places where people aren't necessarily going to invest. Thinking about places like Alaska and Montana for their state legislatures, breaking the Republican supermajority in Indiana or in Kansas. And then obviously just one seat in the Ohio House could break the Republican supermajority there. When we elect Democratic governors, the ability for them to veto and that to be sustained means that the far right just doesn't get to do exactly what they want in these bodies. And we've been recovering in state legislatures across America since, 2010's election. And so by winning these key strategic seats, we're just continuing to amass more power. And I'm really excited about the opportunities, as you can feel and sense, because we just have to meet the moment. Because, if you look at all of the data points, it's crucial to look to see kind of where we are. Since Trump's reelection, Democrats have flipped 30 state legislative seats.
Wow.
Republicans have flipped 0. The momentum is truly in our sails. How do we make sure that we're able to capture as much momentum as we possibly can? Like we always say at states, when a blue wave does not create itself, we have to do the work, and we have to make sure that folks like you, Carla, who's engaging, understands, oh, this state legislator is absolutely critical to unlocking tremendous public policy potential in their state capitals.
Gosh, that's so important. I have a couple of questions for you.
Awesome.
You said that you endorse certain candidates. How do you make sure that those candidates are truly qualified and that they're not going to be like a lame duck person who doesn't move things forward? I know, I listen to Ezra and Leah a lot, and they talk a lot about Democrats in particular who are in office, but they don't really fight for people. They don't fight for what people need. So how do you choose which candidates you're going to endorse?
Yeah. So once we find kind of what is the path to power, then we sit down and have conversations with the person. It's a direct candidate interview, trying to understand exactly what got them into the race, what their story was that they want to tell, and see how that aligns with the needs of the voters that they hope to represent. Through that interview process, we understand kind of what type of campaign they ultimately want to run and the reasons for them running. And then we also have a candidate agreement. That agreement lays out 10 value statements of kind of making sure that we're aligned. I will say that, things that we can accomplish in Virginia under the blue trifecta may look a little differently than the things that we'd accomplish in Mississippi. And so we want to make sure that we're values-based and values aligned, because that values alignment will allow them to be able to get as much as they possibly can for their constituents. And that looks differently in each place. I don't want to be rigid and say, to a Mississippian, are you in favor of a $25 minimum wage? In California, that may make sense. In Mississippi, actually increasing the minimum wage would be a huge win. And so having the flexibility, but also making sure that it's rooted in values that we collectively share is how we approach our vetting system.
I love that. What are the values that you look for in a candidate?
Sure. So a handful of them are, they need to make sure that they completely understand that climate change is real. Things that making sure that they are completely in favor of access to abortion. Economic justice is a key pillar, making sure that they support the right of their constituents to ultimately organize, making sure that equality is a central tenet to their values. And those are just a handful of the things that we really kind of hold our candidates to.
And I would imagine strong rights on strong values around voting rights and
Absolutely, voting rights. And sorry, there's a whole list. When you
reasonable
start
gun
listing, you
control.
always inevitably forget one. But the voting rights one is absolutely critical, Carla. And the reason why I will say that is I think back to Virginia. Schuyler Van Valkenburg, who's now in the state Senate with support from Stateswin, commonly tells folks that before we got a blue trifecta in 2019, Virginia was one of the worst states in America in terms of access to the ballot. But once we had a Democratic governor, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House, they were able to pass 45 days of early voting. They were able to make sure that folks could access absentee ballot. It's now one of the top 10 states in America in terms of access to
Wow.
ballot in just a very short period of time. And so there's nothing more important as we head into the 2026 election, especially, only a day away from another Trump executive order trying to federalize our elections. It's very clear that the administration of our elections in the United States Constitution are in the states. And that is why I feel this sense of urgency to be able to flip the seats where we can and build this democratic power because voting rights is absolutely critical. And if we're not able to hold politicians accountable through elections, that makes it teeters us into some pretty scary times.
Yeah, so true. I know this isn't a topic for this podcast, but I really wish we would change the word abortion access to more like family planning, because then you can even avoid, having to choose to have an abortion. You
Yeah,
know,
1,000,000%. And, I think about Virginia because it's the last state in the South without an abortion ban. So that's why I say abortion access because,
hmm
so many of folks in the South can't even access it. And I think that, in a post-Dobbs world, and that is the goal of the far right, is just to continue to limit access. But, continued conversations around autonomy of women's bodies and and family planning is something that's absolutely critical with voters for sure.
Yeah, because unfortunately, it's led to so many women dying because doctors are afraid of getting in trouble for what's called an abortion. So they come in fully wanting that child, but having a life-threatening emergency. And those states, those people tend to value the life of an unborn fetus more than a grown female, often with a family already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, off that soapbox
No, I appreciate you.
for another episode.
Yeah.
Um, Now you mentioned that you pick. One of my questions was going to be what are the critical states, but I guess that's why you have the 9 states. Is how do you pick the states that you focus on?
Sure. And so they really need to be a place where we can see a path to power. And so, for example, Arizona, we need 4 seats for an outright majority in the Arizona House. We need 3 seats in the Arizona Senate. Re-electing Governor Katie Hobbs, that would create a Democratic trifecta. If we're able to pick up those 4 seats in the House and create that, it would be the first time that Democrats held the Arizona House since the 1960s.
Whoa.
Wild. So that is a perfect example in Wisconsin. I mentioned the numbers earlier, but they for the longest time have had the worst gerrymandered districts in the country. Under fair maps, we saw tremendous success in 2024 there, where we were able to pick up 10 seats in the assembly, 3 seats in the Senate. And so that puts us on the precipice. So we identify states and chambers where we can ultimately make that flip. And then places like Michigan, where we had a blue trifecta in 2022, and unfortunately in 24, we lost the Michigan House. And a place with divided government like Michigan creates stark realities, right? You see the Republican-controlled Michigan House trying to pass bills that just puts them in lockstep with the ruthlessness of ICE in their state, ensuring that they can continue to wear masks, that they can enter into places of worship, to schools, to voting booths. And then you have the Democratic Senate, passing things like, hey, actually, these agents should not be able to be masked or to go into places of worship. And so getting back that Michigan Michigan House and getting that Democratic trifecta will be absolutely critical. In Minnesota, the Minnesota House is tied right now. And so being able to pick up a seat there and maintain and create a blue trifecta will be critical. But these states should all sound pretty familiar. These are the exact states that will be on the path to Democrats winning the next presidency. And so that's partially of it, but these are also, key swing states. North Carolina and Georgia obviously are places where, the presidential campaigns, obviously Biden won in 20, Trump won in 24 in Georgia, but continuing to have conversations and incrementally pick up power. Like if we pick up one seat in the North Carolina Senate, breaks the Republican supermajority. They have a Democratic governor. I don't know if you've been following it like a nerd like I have been, but the polling that's coming out of North Carolina shows that, 48 to 36 North Carolinians prefer Democrats to control their legislature. Republicans have been absolutely ruthless in continuing to draw and redraw and redraw and redraw their maps to limit Democratic power. And so that's exactly what we need to be able to do, is to be able to win when we have the wind at our backs, and then be able to govern effectively, proving to Americans that our form of government is effective and benefits their affordability, their day-to-day lives, and then make sure that we're getting reelected even in, potentially tougher climates. And so that's how we ultimately choose our states. But I'm always someone that will say no state left behind. It will require some assessment and some analysis, but we do hope to potentially expand if we have the resources into states like I mentioned, to Indiana, Kansas, Montana, Idaho, or not Idaho, Alaska. But if folks are interested in seeing us or our expansion or understanding our maps, feel free to go to stateswin.org. And also, if you are a listener and you're like, hey, where are these amazing people and where are their communities being organized? Go to stateswin.org/teams. You'll be able to see if there's a team near you. For our friends in the Bay, I'll plug our friends at California Peninsula at Stateswin. We also have a South Bay team, and then those that are right there in the city, we have Stateswin San Francisco. And if there are any folks on the East Bay that are feeling courageous and want to engage and help us form a team on the East Bay, I'm not certain your listenership goes that far over there, but definitely looking for folks to step up and help us really channel some energy into these highly effective campaigns.
I love that. And I would imagine that the states you focus on rotate per election cycle based on where the most important races are.
Yeah, there's some rotation. Like for example, I'm calling in from Denver, Colorado. The nice thing is Colorado's no longer under state. But in 2018, thanks to the help of Stateswin, we were actually Democrats controlled the House, Republicans controlled our state Senate, and we were fortunate enough to be able to flip it through effective governance here in Colorado. Colorado's no longer at risk at losing their Democratic majority. And those are the types of places that I look to now to start a Stateswin team. And so we have a Stateswin Colorado that's in its nascent days, but excited to be able to, now use some volunteer energy into other states and help them the way that other states have helped Colorado. And so, yes, they change a little bit, but not as fast as I would ultimately like.
Now, tell us why it's important for people who are not in those 9 states to really form an interest and help you guys out to be active in those 9 states. Like I'm calling from California. You called out a lot of the great groups here in California working with you. But tell people why it's important for.
Yeah. It's important because so many state legislative campaigns are decided on the very narrowest of margins, as we have talked about. And we're playing in these races that are very, very close. And so by engaging in a race like that, you could singularly be the impact. For example, that race in Pennsylvania that won the Pennsylvania House, 63 votes. On our phone banks, our volunteers for sure talk to more than 63 people in any given phone bank, and they have phone banks every week. And so by building a campaign that is able to garner people's attention as they get closer to the election, that is exactly the type of work that our volunteer teams throughout the country ultimately do. I think that the thing that our volunteers really pride themselves on is early money. Because, I will say, voters are probably not thinking about their state legislative elections on the second day of April, right? But what can we be doing? How can we be investing to build a campaign that is ready to talk to as many people when they are thinking about their state legislative elections? And so that's the exact type of work that we are doing. And we have fun doing it, right? I think that being in community, whether it's at like a chocolate tasting event or whether it's at like margaritas and tacos that raises, a couple $1,000, folks are like, oh, but that's not going to make an impact. In state legislative races, it absolutely makes an impact. And when you think through the collective effort of all the teams throughout the country, we have a tremendous impact. In 2025, we won 22 of our 22 races. That is, races in Minnesota, in Iowa, in Mississippi, and then we endorsed a handful of candidates that allowed us to expand our majority, the largest majority in decades in the Virginia House. And so that's the type of work that I encourage folks to join in because we can have fun, we can raise some money, we can do some direct voter contact, and we can make a long-lasting impact to the people that are living in those states. Because, for example, Pennsylvania, still Republican-controlled state Senate. My parents still live there. Minimum wage is $7.25. The Democratic House
Wow.
continues to send a bill to raise the minimum wage. Governor Shapiro would love to sign that into law, but the Republicans obstructing in the Pennsylvania Senate is a perfect example of if we had Democratic control of that chamber, we would be able to very easily pass the minimum wage. And so we're definitely working on a handful of campaigns. I know California Peninsula is working with a candidate, Chris Thomas, who's running in one of the seats that is the most likely to flip. And so we're very excited about that campaign. But that is the very important reason why we do this work. We have fun doing it in community so that we don't feel alone. Turn off our New York Times notifications because they get really difficult. We can be in community and make an impact while doing it.
And you have a voice. You got to use it. Use it or
Yeah,
lose it.
that's right. That is right.
What are the
And
most
we know
critical?
And we know that corporations are using their voices, right? I think that this is the exact reason why, being able to be on podcasts like this or having conversations about people engaging, the thing that they want is us to be divided and for us not to take action, for despair to set in. I will say, if you attend a Stateswind event with one of our teams in the Bay Area, you're going to have fun. I hope that you'll be able to contribute to the candidates, and you will see that that afternoon together and making that impact is going to be absolutely critical. And so I really think that this is the antidote to the chaos, to the despair, to the darkness that the White House continues just to push down on us. By being together and making a real impact, we know that we can flip a lot of chambers and impact the lives of millions of Americans.
What are the most critical issues right now that you think the states would have a better job of handling?
This is a
Well,
great
right now it's
question.
almost anything really, but
Yes.
what are the top five critical issues right now?
The thing that we hear from candidates over and over again is affordability. That looks like healthcare as the federal government continues to have massive Medicaid cuts. Making sure that folks can access healthcare is definitely an affordability issue. I know that in a lot of places, education is something that is deeply concerning for folks as we see schools closing. In some states we're working in, like Arizona, their voucher system just goes unchecked. They have, recently done audit, and people are using public dollars that should be going to our public schools on things like Lamborghini driving courses, or extra just absurd things that they are uncovering. And so making sure that we continue to fund public education is definitely an issue of affordability, as well as creating a workforce that will be able to support the businesses that we ultimately have. And then another major issue is data centers and the energy consumptions that are ultimately coming into so many of these communities, because once they get onto the grid, they're driving up the costs for consumers. And so the thing that we're hearing across the board, 1,000,000% is affordability. I think that, as we get closer to the election, I think that, a conversation around ICE and the attacks on our communities is definitely something that will be on voters' minds. And then, between now and September is a lifetime in politics, it feels like. And so I'm sure there will be more issues that come around. But so many of our candidates are really focusing on affordability, because, so many people went and voted for this administration thinking they were going to drive down costs. And we've seen the exact opposite. And so making sure that not only can we draw a contrast to what's happening in Washington, but what we collectively can and will do as Democrats. And for example, in Pennsylvania, raising the minimum wage is definitely something that needs to happen.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I was just listening to a podcast by Kara Fisher. She was interviewing Tristan Harris, and they were saying that probably the most important issue for states right now, and that doesn't get a lot of press, is AI and regulation, and how about half the states have passed strong AI regulation, and how the federal government is trying to prevent them from enacting that.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question. So it's actually, I guess, a twofold question. One is, should AI be considered one of those critical issues, AI regulation? And second, states do all this great job of passing fair and reasonable legislation. How do you prevent the federal government from overriding that when you get some bad players in the White House?
Yeah. So I'll take the first part first, and then I'll come back to the second part. The first part is, it's funny, and it's not funny. It's unique, the sense of data centers, because Prince William County is a place where we worked. In Virginia is a place where we worked, and we see just a massive expansion of data centers. In a Pennsylvania state legislative district in 2024, the candidate was out knocking on doors, and she kept hearing about data centers. And so when we were thinking about the campaign, we polled on it, and the pollster was like, well, this really isn't that big of an issue. Come to find out that when we did the poll, that it actually was something that average day-to-day voters were really top of mind for. And so the one thing that we definitely need to do is continue to have conversations with everyday Americans to see what is impacting their day-to-day lives. And, with our campaigns being as small as they are in some places, we can talk to, thousands and thousands of voters to hear exactly what's happening, and be responsive to the needs of the people that our candidates hope to represent. I will say there still needs to be a lot of public education on AI and the implications that just letting it run wild have on our lives. Listening to that podcast was not something that I thought was going to be optimistic, but I do appreciate how, in our states, there is real innovation and understanding, right? Do we try to regulate AI on a privacy front? Is there conversations that we can have around just protecting children, which I know has been getting a lot of bipartisan support. But what we see in DC, and a consolidation of power, and just these massive AI corporations who own this administration, trying to force this all down and completely stymie conversation and innovation in our states, is something that is really has an impact on the courageousness of states to be able to do something. I know that his executive order ultimately threatened a lot of broadband funding. In so many of our rural communities, they don't only have access to high-speed internet. And if that is something that we want to bring communities into this time, threatening those dollars is something that some state lawmakers are ultimately taking into consideration. The innovation can happen, and it is going to be in our states, because, quite frankly, not a ton is happening in Washington. And so I would just really encourage us to have as many progressively minded lawmakers to think through how do we ultimately regulate AI. And then on the second piece, it's a sad week for me. I cut my teeth in the LGBTQ public policy arena here in Colorado. Our conversion therapy ban was struck down. And those were pieces of legislation that were really, 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 really difficult to pass. And so having a Supreme Court in the way that it ultimately is constructed now is really, really scary. And our state legislature also just immediately tried to identify ways that they could make sure that the fraud that is conversion therapy and trying to sell someone that they can change their sexual orientation or gender identity, that fraud should not be allowed to exist. And so the states have always been laboratories of innovation for public policy. And I will say that the right has done this. Right? This is exactly what the right was doing when they were trying to continue to pass anti-choice pieces of legislation to get before the United States Supreme Court to ultimately overturn Roe. And so, if it isn't the one bill in Mississippi that shut down all of the clinics, getting to the Supreme Court, that the overturning of Roe would not have been possible. And so, yes, we need to continue to build power in our states. Simultaneously, so many of our candidates are nested underneath congressional districts, so all rising tide lifts all boats. And so, definitely focusing on a state legislative race that is nested in a congressional campaign that hopefully is also in, because there's a lot of competitive U.S. Senate races in the states that we're in as well, can help lift all of those boats in kind of what that blue wave will ultimately look like. And so I can't be discouraged because I know that, yes, we do have an extremely conservative Supreme Court, but if we stop working, they're winning. And so I continue to do this day in and day out because I get to meet, again, these people who so courageously are stepping forward and knocking on doors and talking to neighbors about what their community needs and how best they can represent them. And I see the power of the community to be able to do that.
I love that you're so passionate about this and you can feel it. You can hear it in your voice.
And it's because I will say, Carla, as I've spent my entire career in state legislatures, as an out gay man, out married gay man, I've seen the evolution, right? I was, first starting when all of the horrible amendments were being passed by state after state after state. That felt awful. And now I've seen, this journey and was part of a journey to help win marriage in a handful of states and then ultimately the resolution at the court with the Obergefell decision. But, I will also say that there's still a ton of states where you can be fired or denied housing just because of who you are or who you love. By creating democratic trifectas, when we had the trifecta in Michigan, they were able to add sexual orientation and gender identity to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. That is the type
Wow.
of public policy that we're able to achieve when we have these democratic trifectas. And so I continue to do this day in and day out, but I just see so many awesome people who are passionate about their community. And so I feel obligated to meet that passion, to do everything that I can to help get them elected so that they can passionately lead in their state legislatures and, really help the people that they work with to get there.
Is there any question you wish I had asked that I haven't asked that you want to answer?
That's a great question. I always like uh, to talk about our volunteers. Um,
Mm,
I don't, I often will think through kind of electoral strategy, but the other half of my work is working with people who think about this as much as me. And then there's also people that are able to come to an event, write a check to a candidate, and then, we may not see them again until the next event. But our volunteers are the lifeblood of our work. And without people, being willing to be courageous in communities that it may not be as difficult to be courageous, right? In Denver, Colorado, saying that you are a Democrat is not something that I'm going to be criticized for. So how can I be more courageous in my space to support other courageous people where it may be more difficult? I will say between now and the election in November, I would just ask listeners to try to figure out at what point do you feel courageous? And then that's probably what you need to do. You need to do something that feels courageous and then maybe go a little bit further. And so the person that is listening that felt courageous to go to No Kings, to be in a crowd that large, but you were nervous because of the political climate that is being created by this administration. Thank you. Thank you for being courageous in that moment. But I would encourage you then, hopefully you got home and you realized that that was a good step to be in solidarity with all of your neighbors. I would ask you, take one more step. Go to an event from one of our volunteer teams. And you know what? I promise you that they'll welcome you with open arms, that you will feel a sense of community. And then I'll encourage you, maybe go get a little bit more courageous, phone bank, dial in, write some postcards. But that's always the thing that I think I like to talk about is folks just trying to be a little bit more courageous, especially if they're in a place where it's not as hard to be courageous as what our candidates ultimately exhibit.
I love that. Go out and volunteer at States Win or Indivisible Mid-Peninsula or
Indivisible Mid-Peninsula or whatever is your calling. It's really awesome to see a collective effort. The work at Indivisible is absolutely critical, holding all of these lawmakers accountable. I think that is another key thing, because once we get them elected, how do we do that? Indivisible is doing such amazing work on that and in the electoral front and the No Kings. And so it's really awesome to be in solidarity, because it will take all of us to collectively do this. And so that's why I think that it's so awesome to be on your show. I can't thank Jackie enough for making the connection with Indivisible. And yeah, just if there's ever anything that I can do to be supportive, happy to be a part of this amazing ecosystem that has been created in light of what's happening in Washington. And just to see this ecosystem having grown, right? I think both organizations were founded shortly after the first election, and the resistance looks different now. And people commonly ask me, do you feel that the resistance is less because everyone thinks about the Women's March and the very public, but to look at No Kings, 8 million Americans spent their Saturday afternoon because they were so frustrated. In 2025, our teams of volunteers raised more money for our candidates than in any non-presidential year. It's absolutely remarkable. The energy is out there. I think that it's really important for us all to give folks grace, to bring them in. They may not fully understand what action it is they are ultimately taking, but to provide them the training, the resources that are necessary so that they can take action. Because taking action is actually what's going to make us feel a little bit better, get us out of that despair into community and recognize, hey, we can do something. We are doing something, as we're seeing with the state legislative wins throughout the country. And for us to be able to capitalize on this, we just need as many people as we possibly can acting in collaboration. And so that's why it's really nice to be here with you all. And yeah, I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for your time, Sean. Thanks for being on our show.
Of course. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I hope you got some great information from today's show. Please support States Win, especially as a volunteer. We really need lots more people out there volunteering for civic action. Please click that follow button and then share this episode with a few people that you think will benefit from hearing it. Until next time, be brave in the Bay.